You're watching Business Nigeria. Nigeria's fuel market has undergone a major transformation since the removal of petrol subsidy in 2023 by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, with government pursuing reforms aimed at building a stronger and more sustainable economy. The policy has opened up fiscal space, increased government allocations, and supported investments across key sectors. The reform is also changing how Nigeria gets its fuel, with the rise of domestic refining reducing reliance on imported petroleum products. The Dangote refinery and other local players are strengthening supply, supporting energy security, and creating new opportunities for Nigeria to become a regional refining hub. Government is also expanding alternatives, such as compressed natural gas, to provide more affordable transportation options for Nigerians. Now, these measures are part of efforts to ensure that the benefits of reform extend beyond government finances to households, businesses, and the wider economy. As Nigeria moves deeper into this transition, the focus is now on sustaining the gains, improving efficiency, and ensuring that domestic refining delivers greater value. Joining me for this conversation is the Vice Chairman, African Energy Council, Dr. Chinan Dikwal. Thank you so much for joining us at this time.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
All right. So what would a reversal of key economic reforms mean for Nigeria's macroeconomic stability, particularly inflation, the exchange rate, and government finances?
Yeah, so when you say macroeconomic reforms, I can imagine, you're talking about some of the reforms that happened, the last couple of years. So two, I think really important one comes to mind. One is obviously the subsidy removal. Yeah. So that was one, but also don't forget we also had the exchange rate reform, so floating the naira. So if I just focus on those just for now, and I think to answer your question, I'll first of all say, have these reformed, have they really delivered, I think is probably the best way to start. And to answer that, I'd say this. One is when you look at it from a macroeconomic level, there's no question that those reforms were needed and they've had real impact on Nigeria's fiscal standing. And you can look at that impact, in lots of matrices that have been released by several organizations, whether it's, S&P, or even if you look at the World Bank or IMF, which are very controversial, but for sure, you look at those matrices, you can see that some of those reforms have really delivered. Nigeria was virtually at the brink of insolvency before subsidy was removed. So yes, it's consolidated FX rate, a lot more stable today for sure, a lot more credit worthy, a country like Nigeria, but I think several. So on a macroeconomic level, you look at our foreign reserves have gone up. On a macroeconomic level, that makes a lot of sense, no question. How has that translated to a common man on the street? I think that's the pertinent question we should ask. Macroeconomics works, microeconomics, I think that's where the issue has been. So you'd find a lot of Nigerians complaining about the real hardship, on the ground and all of that. So yes, those reforms have happened macro. The implementation all the way to the ordinary Nigerian, I think that's been where the problem has been. So I hear a lot of rhetoric, some people saying they want to reverse those reforms. Personally, I think that's not really thought through. That's not fully thought through, because the cost of reversing this will be, in my opinion, probably double the pain that we are going through right now.
Well, if you say double the pain, what do you think we might be going through if these reforms are reversed, like some other people are saying it should be?
Yeah, several things. One, like I said, we were at the brink of insolvency as a nation. So what that ultimately means is we would start. So I'll take you back actually to go back to 2020, go back to 2019, 2018. When you look at the state, the fiscal structure of the subnationals, many of them were really struggling. To undertake capital projects was a big problem. Many of them had to get the backing, the guarantee of Nigeria to go out and borrow money to build bridges and capital projects and all of that stuff. That was one. Number two, even salaries were a major problem. Many of them would owe salaries 11 months. You're not hearing any of that today. And I'm not saying that the reforms is what has fully delivered this. But for sure, you are not hearing that again. If you reverse those gains, we'll go back to those levels and more. But also, importantly, we'll go back to a nation where subsidy will be consuming about 40% of total intake, government take, as it were. For any household, you think about it, speaking to me right now, you think about that. If today I say to you that one bill element of your house. So if you think about what you earn, one element of your sort of spending is almost 40%. It's a huge, huge number. You try to manage that. That was what subsidy was for the Nigerian state. So we're almost insolvent. If we go back to that, I think it's going to be unbelievable pain, especially given what we've seen in the last 3 years.
Well, but when you say unbelievable pain, because there are people who, if you listen to people who are speaking about those subsidy issues, they talk about the fact that they miss the days of fuel being about 100 and something naira per liter. The cost of production, the cost of goods and services is not as expensive as that now. So if you are saying that it's going to be bad for the economy, what about the layman? What about the common man who feels the brunt, especially because right now the price of fuel is about 1,230 naira or so per liter?
I'll answer it this way. So I'll go back to my example. If you're head of a household, okay, and you do your bill for the whole month, okay, and very clearly there's one item that is really huge, which is what subsidy was about 40%. Okay, so think about this. What is the use of having that lifestyle, which you're describing there, if all of a sudden you will get kicked out of your house? I don't know if that makes any sense. The point I'm trying to make here is we're almost insolvent. So if you become insolvent, then you would lose that lifestyle, you'd lose that fuel that you're talking about. You're buying it so cheap, you'd lose your house, you'd lose everything. So it's a case where it was not physically tenable. We're on a path that was not physically tenable. And when you forecast into the future, there was just no light at the end of the tunnel. It had to be done. That had to be removed. Now, to remove that, the question is, if you remove it, the real question we should be asking is, how do you remove that? And what does it mean for the ordinary people? What cushions do you need to put in place? Do we need to do targeted things in terms of healthcare? Do we need to subsidize mass transit? Do we need to think about agricultural logistics and see how we can subsidize that so that food inflation doesn't happen? That is the fundamental question. Subsidy was removed. A huge chunk of that money was put in the hands of 36 governors who are meant to pass that down to the common man. We've not seen that. You go to most of the states, even the capital projects have dried up right now. So these, I think, removing subsidy, there's no question fiscally that it makes sense. But the implementation and trickling all of that down to the common man, that's where the huge problem has been. But without a doubt, I also miss fuel, being at 300 naira per liter. No question about that. But I think it was fiscally untenable. We would have gone into real financial problems if that had continued. And don't forget, I'll say this as well. Many people, romanticize about those days. Yes, but you go to the filling station, you will not even get the fuel. You would not have huge amounts of scarcity that we're going through at the time, massive pockets of some people swelling from the subsidy scam and everything, a lot of fuel being diverted into Cameroon, diverted into Niger, because their price was higher, ours was much lower. So there were many of these things as well that people forget and they're romanticizing. I completely understand that. But the point I make very clearly is, the Ahmed Tinubu government needs to think, now the subsidy has been taken off, is that the right approach to pass it on to governors? Should we think about another way to subsidize and make sure that these subsidies that have been taken off the common man is given back to them in a particular way?
So how can the government balance legitimate concerns about the social impact of reforms with the need to maintain policy consistency and protect investor confidence?
Yeah, so this is a very difficult one, I've got to say. It's a super difficult one. I'll say this, right? So think about what happened. We implemented two things at the same time. Like I say, we floated the naira, so the naira exchange rate, which is one thing. It's a major reform. Floating the naira I know many people just focus on subsidy, but they do not see that the naira reform was probably just as big. And the reason why I say that is because even for the common man on the street, just because the naira float was taken away, your price of petrol just goes up astronomically. Why? Because petrol is an internationally traded commodity. Crude oil is an internationally traded commodity. So all of a sudden, if your exchange rate weakens, then you're buying it at super expensive price, which is one thing. Even the price of imports of any equipment that's coming to Nigeria, which is denominated in dollars, just means that it becomes super expensive. So that reform, coupled with subsidy reform, has really put a lot of strain onto the Nigerian economy. And I think this is the fundamental discussion. How do we start to cushion that effect? What needs to be done if, as we go into 2027, should agriculture, part of the agricultural value chain, should that be subsidized to stem food, food inflation? You look at food inflation today, I think in the month of July, about 20% inflation, principally just on food prices. Okay, so should some targeted intervention be done in that regard? And you asked me about some of the social vehicles. I think that we have to wear that mindset and that headspace, because honestly, when you look at Nigerians, they are really groaning under this pain, and government has to listen.
All right, so in your opinion, what specific reforms or policy commitments must Nigeria sustain over the next few years to convince investors that the country remains credible and predictable destination for investment?
Yeah. So again, this has been a difficult one. I'll be very honest. I think investor confidence in our country right now, it hit quite a low over the last couple of years. And it hit a low for several reasons. Because like I said, one, the naira float was taken away. And as you can imagine, if you have an external investor who is going to, so if I just focus on external before I come to internal, if you have an external investor who is pulling in his money into the country, one of the things they want is certainty. A lot of certainty. Yeah. And when I say certainty, I mean certainty in, currency and exchange rates, currency, certainty in reforms, in government reforms, and, just certainty in terms of business operations. Now, all of the three that I've mentioned, there have been huge uncertainty around them. So if you brought your huge dollars into Nigeria the last couple of years, we've just gone through massive reform. And that's one of the things that investors, really struggle with, just changing the rule mid-play. When the game is going on, you change the rule of play. Dollars and investors don't like that at all. That's one. But number two, the currency movement as well has sent even a lot of the companies in Nigeria, has made them, leave. I mean, this is not, it's not rocket science. What I'm saying here is fact. Many companies that were in Nigeria for 30, 40 years and were operating here, the currency reform, just made it impractical for them to keep operating. All of a sudden, cost and risk that they were carrying was way too high, and many of them closed shop. So you asked me the question, what does Nigeria need to demonstrate to show, credibility to investors? I think is sustained performance. Now that we've gone through this review, this, review, fiscal review, as it were, we need to see long-term play where the investment landscape remains the same. I think one, without much changes, sort of as we're going right now. But also we need to see the openness of government, the willingness of government to open up and sort of attract them back and negotiate. And we're seeing that already. Let me give you an example. Even last week, we saw that in oil and gas. We saw this, the CEO of Shell, Sawan. He was in Nigeria, looking at Bonga, Southwest. This is just an example, okay, to take FID on a $21 billion project. So new capital coming into Nigeria. Why is that happening? It's happening at the back of an incentive, an executive order that we saw signed, just a couple of weeks ago. And the other executive orders we have seen in oil and gas have also facilitated new capital that is coming in. But what these capital that's coming in requires is certainty. It requires pure play certainty and not changing the rule mid-play.
Okay, so how long should Nigerians reasonably wait for the benefits of these reforms to translate into lower inflation, better wages, cheaper transportation, and improved purchasing power?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to put time on anything. First of all, that is a question for the executive to answer. But if I would say, these reforms should not take this long for us to start to see. Really, we're 3 years in right now. We should have started to see the benefits of this reform even from year 2.
Are you saying we're not seeing the benefit yet?
Macroeconomically, we've seen the benefits. This is the point I make. Macroeconomically, look at the foreign reserve. Went from about 40 billion to about 45 billion, I think, dollars. So without a doubt, we could see the reforms there, macro reforms. We could see our rating, has become very stable. We can see our FX rate, our foreign exchange rate also very stable. No question from a macro standpoint. But people don't eat macro. People don't eat macro. People eat micro. Okay, so that's what you can hear. That's what. So the question there is, okay, with all of what I've just told you, foreign reserve going from 40 to 45. What does that mean to the man in Nasarawa State? What does it mean to the man in Bayelsa State? What does it mean to him, to the food on his table? That's the questions Nigerians are asking. For him, as far as he's concerned, like you mentioned there, fuel price has gone up. He's paying over 1,200 naira per litre. Food prices have gone up. Most of the things around them have gone up. The benchmarks they had a few years ago all have moved. So the question there is, what can government do with all of these things I've mentioned? Foreign reserve going up, a lot more stability, a lot more liquidity, which is now in the hands of governors. What can government do to make sure that that man who is in Bayelsa gets some sort of reprieve? What can they do to make sure that he gets some succor from government? Can you subsidize the agricultural supply chain? Can you subsidize his transportation, mass transit? Can you subsidize? These are the questions that Nigerians are asking. These are the fundamental questions I think that we need to answer. But without a doubt, the rationale to remove subsidy, there's no question that it's the right thing to do. And I actually think that the push to go back to the old regime, in my opinion, I think is a mistake.
So if you think that the subsidy removal is the right thing to do, why do we have consistently have people call for a reversal of these reforms, of this subsidy?
We're in the era of politics. We are in the area of politics. I can completely understand it, which is one. But outside politics, I have to admit the pain that people are feeling. It's no question about that. Just go out into the street. People are feeling real pain today. And when people are feeling real pain, the natural human tendency is to revert to status quo. And I think these calls are genuine calls. They are genuine calls. The point I'm making is you would not hear these calls. You wouldn't hear them if we'd remove subsidy and taking all of that subsidy advantage and plowed it back into the population. Then you would not hear these calls. So I am saying I agree with subsidy removal. I disagree with subsidy implementation. That's the distinction. So that's why people are shouting on the streets. And I think if they actually look at it very closely to understand the risks of going back to the old regime, nobody would want to go back there. The real gap here is in the implementation of the subsidy removal, because there is a lot of money. It's in the hands of 36 governors. That needs to translate to the ordinary people.
Vice Chairman of African Energy Council, Dr. Chinan Dikwal, thank you so much for lending your thoughts on these issues. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we'll take a quick break, and when we return, we have more discussions. Of course, we'll talk about the trading